Well, hi guys, welcome back to Petrophysics Rocks. I've been a bit naive. Again, I can't believe it after 40 years of doing this nonsense. I've kind of misjudged this one a little bit. I'm gonna have to split this presentation up into two parts. I somehow forgotten how much I like to talk. So I had originally intended to run this presentation, a North Sea log analysis, in one big presentation, but I kind of took a little bit too much time introducing the well and the North Sea in general. So I thought I'd have to split the introduction to the well and where it is and what sort of geology we see in the North Sea, slightly separate from the second part of it, which I'm going to have to run now, which is the log analysis bit of it, the CPI, computer processed interpretation. I thought I'd do this presentation as a kind of an intermediate step. Those of you who followed me for a wee while, both here on the Petrophysics YouTube channel, my Petrophysics Rocks YouTube channel, and on my original Petrophysics for Dummies series on my own website. So that's about 12 years ago now or whatever. Any graduates from those classes, if you like, would be able to take the next step and take some of the theoretical stuff that I presented in the Petrophysics for Dummies series and link it through into a real world analysis example here. So I'm just trying to sort of move us on a little bit to the next stage. And if you haven't ever heard of what log analysis is, why you might be interested in looking at it as a YouTube participant, then if you check out the Petrophysics for Dummies, hopefully I've provided enough links between the theoretical basic stuff and some of this more applied real stuff. And you might find it interesting, you know, to work out how we quantify the amount of oil in our oil field reservoirs and then get an idea of how quickly it might flow out and how quickly we might be able to produce it. Now, this beautiful landscape behind me was a photograph I borrowed from my old colleague Steve Adams, now at Bulgoni Geoscience. He runs various field trips around all parts of Scotland. This one's over on the west coast. I'm still here in Aberdeen, so over on the east. But the rocks here are reasonably relevant to this particular story. These are a bit older. These are about 400 million years old. The Devonian rocks, which if you look up in a geological timescale is a fair while ago. And the rocks that we're dealing with in this North Sea example are Triassic rocks. So they're about 250 million years ago. So the same thing, similar sort of thing, whether a sand grain is moving around 450 million years ago or 200 million years ago, or even today out on the beach, the processes are the same. That's one of the nice things about geology. Stuff that happened in the past is often repeated, and the processes are still going on today. So they deposit very similar rocks, and you can see here that this, if I just get out of the way, this beautiful old red sandstone, Devonian. These are kind of rocks laid down by rivers in a desert environment. As I say, 400 million years ago, 420 million years ago, and the rocks that we're going to be dealing with here are similar processes, but just a bit 250 million years ago, so 200 million years later. As I say, I made a slight error of judgment. I should know by now, really. I'm going to have to split this into two presentations, but hopefully see how you get on with the first bit. Hopefully it'll pique your interest. Maybe grab a cup of coffee or something a bit stronger, and then come back and watch what I'm going to make into part two. Okie dokie. Well, if you could give me a like and subscribe, even though I've waffled on a bit too much, please forgive me. I will try and get these things a little bit more snappy. This kind of presentation, I'm hoping maybe I'll get a series of practical applied log interpretations together. This one will kind of go with the Falklands well presentation that I made. It shows you a bit of real data from the Falklands. Here's a bit of real data from the North Sea. It's all released by the government authorities here, the NSTA. You can download this data yourself, actually, from the government website, the NSTA website. I might try and get some similarly released data for some Indonesian wells or some Vietnamese wells, perhaps down the line. If you get down in the comments and say where you'd like me to have a look at next, if I can rustle up some publicly available data, I'll certainly have a tackle at it. And I've learned a few lessons this time around. Maybe I won't go into as much detail about everything as I did here. But the idea was just to give you a flavour for the sorts of things I think about when I'm analysing wells, and the reality that you have to keep in the back of your head in the hope that you don't go too far wrong when you're analysing a North Sea well. Okay, so I'll leave it with you. I'll see you after in the break a little bit, and try and persuade you to come back for part 2 as well. Thank you very much for your attention. So here we go, a North Sea log analysis. Thanks a lot. Cheers. Like and subscribe. Much appreciated. Hello there. Welcome back. Welcome to a North Sea log analysis. This presentation, I hope to move us on a little bit further from where we were before with Petrophysics for Dummies. The presentation that's also available on Petrophysics Rock's YouTube channel. Hopefully any young Padawans, graduates of the Petrophysics for Dummies series can follow this on, and along the way we'll be touching and bringing along some of the lessons learned from Petrophysics for Dummies. I'll try and highlight where those basic principles can be applied in a real world log analysis. This is an example from the North Sea. Obviously, if you are a little bit more advanced at log analysis, I thought it might still be interesting for you, depending on what part of the world you're in, to see what a typical, hesitate to say that, a typical North Sea well looks like. This happens to be a gas condensate well, which is not, I would say, too typical for the North Sea, but nevertheless the geology that it encounters it is typical of the North Sea and gives a good example of what we see in this part of the world. So if you're watching from overseas, thought this might be a useful companion, perhaps to the other presentation I made on a Falkland Islands well. And perhaps one day we might get a collection, I might get a collection of these international log analyses together. And we might, once you get keen on the idea, you might hassle me down in the comments for, well, let's do an Indonesian well or a Vietnam well or whatever. But I've put this North Sea well together just to illustrate some of the learnings from the Petrophysics for Dummies course and bring it on just another little level with some real world examples as opposed to the sort of made up logs that I had. I should say here that this particular well, 37.8, is a well that was drilled a long time ago, and all the data is released on the government website, the NSTA website, and you'll see full acknowledgements in the text and or whatever. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to start off, just introduce myself for those who don't know me. I'm Graham Davis. I'm a petrophysicist, recreational petrophysicist these days. Just started up this YouTube channel. My background, I started out with Enterprise Oil, a small British independent company in the mid-80s. And then there's some companies that you might have heard of before, BP and Shell, large major international oil companies. And then I spent some time at CNR, a Canadian company. And I've just finished up at Premier Oil, and Harbour Energy is where I've just retired from. The other thing here is I've got a couple of societies that I've been involved with. The Society of Petrophysicists and Well Log Analysts. I've been the president of the local chapter here for a couple of times, and also I was involved in the DevEx conference a couple of times. I chaired that a few times, which is a sort of a subsurface conference that we have here in Aberdeen. Anyway, so I have worked a number of basins around the world and seen a number of different rock types. I lived in the UAE, in Sharjah, and Oman for a wee while. But I've worked, as I say, across a number of geological basins. And what we're going to talk about today is the North Sea. The North Sea, for those of you who don't know, is the sea between the UK and Norway, and a bit of Denmark here, and Holland, and a bit of Germany as well. So this Northern European North Sea, and that's the area of our focus today. And we're going to have a look at a particular well example, and I'm going to take you through the interpretation of it. I'm using some log analysis software. I'm not sponsored by Logic or the guys at Logicon, and in fact some of the things I'll do here will kind of slow things down. I've done a sort of like a stop animation, like an Aardman type production. Typically when you run this analysis, it takes well, my code takes about 5 minutes to run. It's not compiled or whatever, so it's a bit slower than the code that's normally out there. But normally this analysis would take 5 minutes. Now we're going to take a little bit longer to go through it, so that we'll build up the analysis and you can hopefully get a better feel for what's going on. As I say, this is going to be my approach to log analysis. Now, not everybody does their log analysis in the same way, and that's part of the joys of Petrophysics. We've all got different ways of approaching things. This is my approach, and some of the habits that I've picked up over the years. But if we go into the North Sea and we ask ChatGPT, can you summarize the North Sea in 3 or 4 bullet points? This is currently what it's coming up with. It says the North Sea is a mature oil and gas producing province. And it's transitioning to renewables, isn't everybody? It has a strategic geopolitical location. Obviously, I've mentioned there's a lot of Northern European industry, big markets around here, this part of the world. It's been pretty stable over the years, give or take a few cable cutting issues and pipeline issues more recently. But it's a pretty good place to do business, good markets. And apparently it has emerging hydrogen potential as we look to utilise all the stuff in the North Sea over the last few years, the infrastructure there to develop hydrogen. The North Sea has apparently, as of November 2023, produced around 46 billion barrels of oil equivalent. That's what's been extracted so far, and they reckon there's about 4 billion barrels of proven reserves left to go, so we know that's there. More speculatively, there's about 6 billion barrels of what they call contingent resources, which we've identified, but will need to do certain work to bring it to maturity before the basin shuts down, before all of the infrastructure disappears. And that's one of the challenges in the North Sea at the moment. We've got a lot of infrastructure has been out there for 30, 40, 50 years. And it's aging, and obviously with the current climate, everybody wants to seem to shut it down. So there's a certain amount of oil that may never be recovered because it'll just be too late for our efforts. But anyway, I'm a mature oil and gas producing sort of a guy, so I've been around for this first bullet point, certainly, just starting to dip our toes into this second bit. I've done some work on that, but this presentation is mainly really around doing the first bullet point. So if we take the North Sea then, what happens? Where are the gas fields and the oil fields? If you're with Shell, this will be a bit confusing to you potentially, because all of the oil fields are typically coloured in green, and gas fields are coloured in yellow. sorry, that's condensate gas. Condensate fields are coloured in yellow, and red is gas. Shell do it the other way around, so that just adds a bit of excitement and confusion to things. So these are the fields that have been discovered in the North Sea. As you see, there's quite a few of them. And early in the North Sea's development, we had the UK government split this up into quadrants. These large blocks are called quadrants. They're numbered quadrants, and they're licensed out to oil companies to produce from. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at a particular quadrant here, quadrant 30 in the central North Sea. So we've got the southern North Sea here, we've got the central North Sea here, and we've got the northern North Sea up here. And we're interested in this this block here, 30. This is where our example well is going to come from. So we're going to zoom in, and we can see it's in the Blaine, Affleck, Fergus area. And if we zoom in again a little bit more, then some more fields come to light. Still, we haven't seen our field yet. Orc, AUK, arguably the first field in Shell's discovery in the North Sea. And there are other fields around it. So we have to zoom in a little bit further before we start to see ours. And when we zoom in, we see that actually these quads, these large blocks, these quadrants, are actually split up into blocks of 30. So there are 30 blocks in here, and this is how we identify the wells in the North Sea. So our well is in Judy, as it happens, and this is quad 30, and this is block 7. So this is 37, and we're interested in the 8th well drilled on the structure, and that's the 37-8. And you can see the blocks aren't quite full here. They don't have 30 blocks in this well, and that's because here we have the Norwegian median line, and the other side of this line is governed by our Norwegian colleagues from across the ocean, and so this is the UK sector that we're in, and that's obviously it's not ours, so we can't play in that game, in that pool. Anyway, so that aside, so we're interested in this well, 37-8, which, as you can see here from the NSTA website, the North Sea Transition Authority, as it's called these days, it was completed in 1989, just at the beginning in January there. So most of the drilling was done in 1988. And if we zoom in a little bit further, this is the well here, 37-8. Back in the day, we would have got in the helicopter and flown out to the rig to do a logging job. Us highfalutin oil executives would fly out to make the measurements, and the tools that we would use would go by boat because they're quite heavy to lift. So if we look at this slide from Petrophysics for Dummies, it'll remind you that this is the logging tools that we measure, wireline logging tools, and they are lowered into the wellbore on a cable down the wellbore, and they make the measurements, and then they transmit the data up through the cable to the surface computers here. Now these days, since around about 1992, LWD, logging while drilling, has been more widely utilized. Obviously, as you drill the well, you drill down here, and I stole this slide from Scientific Drilling because it's quite a pretty slide, and you can see the drill bit here. So this is actually an instrumented drilling assembly. So as you're drilling down with this tool, you've got smart sensors in here that actually make measurements in the formation as you go, and then they generally pulse them back up through the mud through a pressure pulsing system, quite a complex system called mud pulse telemetry, back to surface where they're decoded. Now, some drill strings, particularly in Norway, are what's called instrumented or wired pipe. So they actually have electrical and communications all the way through the pipe, and that's sent up electrically, a bit like wireline, and that allows you to send a little bit more data up so you can record more data downhole, higher bandwidth or whatever. But the majority of LWD signals are decoded downhole, the measurements are made downhole, and then they're pulsed up to surface where they're decoded. Okay, so, but back in the day, in 1988, we would have gone offshore, as my presentation on what I've learned from 40 years of my career talked about, how we made the analysis offshore. And this is these are the wells, this is the well log that we would have recorded in this well. Here is surface to TD, and Petrophysics for Dummies took you through what all these squiggly lines meant and what we were making measurements of here. So here is a gamma ray, here is a density neutron run, here is a sonic log, measures how fast sound waves travel through the rock, and here is the resistivity, how resistive are the beds that we're recording through. And we've got some other measurements here as well, which we go to in a little bit more detail. Okay, so if we just zoom into the area of interest here below the Eocene layers, there are some reservoirs up in the Eocene, but most of the time in this part of the world they're pretty boring shaly mud rocks, and these act as caps to keep the hydrocarbon in the reservoir. So we have here the Paleocene interval, and typical reservoirs in the Paleocene might be the 40s reservoirs that you may have heard of, the 40s sandstone. The Cretaceous reservoirs are generally chalk reservoirs. We have chalks in the central North Sea. They're not quite as nice as the Norwegian chalks. Their chalks and the Danish chalks are a little bit nicer than ours, more porosity. But nevertheless, we do have chalk reservoirs in the North Sea as well. And we have some Jurassic reservoirs, and that's probably the predominant reservoir that the North Sea is famous for, really. The Jurassic reservoirs, Brentfield and Ninians and Magnus is a Jurassic reservoir as well. But in this particular example here is what's called the Triassic, which is the next one down. Obviously, everybody knows about the Jurassic from Jurassic Park and dinosaurs and stuff like that, and that's around about 280 million years ago, as if I recall. So these reservoirs here, the Heron group in this particular example in the Triassic, are a little bit older. And what we're going to do now is we're going to have a look in a little bit more detail at these logs. One of the things that I do that I've fallen into the habit of doing recently is I normalize the gamma ray. Now, as I may have mentioned in the Petrophysics for Dummies course, as we drill the wells, we start out quite a big hole size. We have circulating mud that keeps the formation open while we drill it, and then we get to a certain depth, and then we set pipe. We set a metal liner to keep it open for the longer term, and then we drill in the next hole section slightly smaller hole size, and then we set pipe again. So we build this well up, construct the well with concentric, sort of getting smaller drill pipe here, and you can see this is larger hole size and this is smaller hole size. And in the wireline logging terms, the tool is actually the same size for all these different hole sizes. So if you're making measurements with a tool and you've got different hole sizes, obviously that affects the measurements in different ways, so they get attenuated. If you've got a big hole size with a heavy drilling mud in it, it's quite difficult to get a signal from the formation. Whereas if you're in a small hole size, the logging tool fills up most of that hole, and you're measuring the direction, the formation more directly. So what I've got into the habit of doing is just normalizing this gamma ray per hole section. So you'll see that this is a clean bit of the gamma ray. It happens to be a chalk reservoir, and then this is the dirty, shaly bit of the reservoir, but per hole section. So it basically just tries to sort of normalize between 0 and 1 the gamma ray. I've found it quite useful to have a normalized gamma ray floating around the place when you come to make some corrections and things like that. It's quite handy to do, and it kind of keys your eye in a little bit as well, where the clean stuff is. And generally in log analysis, we're interested in the clean stuff. So just taking this at face value, you go, okay, right, well, that's nice and clean formation, be interested in that. and some of this stuff in here, the yellowy stuff, looks a bit cleaner as well, and maybe in here. So that sort of immediately gets your eye in first off. Anyway, probably spent far too much time explaining that. But if we look at a log in a little bit more detail, here is the log header information, and here we have all of the details about the well, the next log, and here we see that the header details the history of the well, and so we can see that this well was spudded, which means it started drilling on the 29th of September 1988, and it finished in 17th of January 1989. And here is all the information about where the well is, the location, and these are those casing strings that I was just talking about. We drilled the 36-inch hole down to 530 feet, and then by the time we finished off, we're down at 13,000, nearly 14,000 feet deep in the reservoir, and we drilled these different hole sections. It was drilled by Phillips Petroleum, so I've put their logo up here, and this field is called Judy, so I've put a little cartoon of Judy Garland in there just to sort of illustrate where we are. And these are the logs that were run in this reservoir. So we've got run 2, we've got 4 runs of logging that we've made in this reservoir, and again I talked about that in the Petrophysics for Dummies presentation. So these are the logs that we've recorded. They all mean something to me, and hopefully by the end of this they might mean something to you. The LDT and CNT, that's the litho density tool, and the CNT is the compensated neutron tool. So in logging we're famous for our TLAs, 3-letter acronyms, which is seen as a bit of a jargon to most people actually, and can be a bit confusing, but they're just it just saves us having to write the whole tool name down or whatever. So these are the services that were run in the well, and you can see the maximum recorded thermometer temperatures we got were 300 degrees. It's quite hot reservoir, 300 degrees Fahrenheit, about 150 degrees Celsius, and this is the mud that we ran. And here we have a little bit of a history of the field, of the well, from the end of well report. I like to put those on just to sort of give you a flavour of what we're doing with these wells. And then if we go on, here is a time depth curve. So this is how the well was drilled. It was drilled down. This is depth on this axis, and time in days across here. So we're out to what's that, 60 days to get to TD, and then there's various stages. We were cutting core and making logs, and then when we finished that, we came out of the well and we tested the well here, and then we set the pipe, and then we set another plug and abandoned it, and we tested the well here, and we basically came out of the well testing or sucking on the well a little bit as we go. And then by the time it all finished, it's 110 days to finish this well. So that's a time depth curve, and I thought I'd just sort of dig out the AFE, the allocated for expenditure. This is the cost of the well, and overall you can see that it cost $9.2 million to drill back in 1988, and if you take those costs through to today's time, through inflation, that's around about $25 million in today's prices. And actually, it's probably not too far off what wells cost now. I would imagine that probably with a bit of extra inflation, not just retail price index, a typical North Sea well might cost $30 to $40 million to drill. I've been involved in a well that cost us $102 million to drill. It was a high temperature, high pressure well, and I didn't find anything actually. So that was $102 million that we had to write off. And I know I don't want to get too political on this channel, but a lot of people sort of talk about the amount of profits that oil companies make. All I would say is, just on this side of stuff, this is pretty expensive stuff to do. So the things that we do very expensive. Now in this case, this was a successful well, a discovery well, but nevertheless it cost $25 million, and it could have just as easily failed. Back in the day, the logging bit, the squiggly line stuff that I would normally do, was as you can see here, $715,000, which in today's cost is around about $2 million, which is probably about right. So the stuff that we do, the measurements that we make, cost about $2 million, and the wells cost about $30 million. So that's something just to bear in mind the next time that conversation comes up about how much excess profits. Anyway, okay, I won't labour the point anymore. That's not the purpose of this. So here is some more logs in a bit more detail. Again, we have this normalized gamma ray. Here's the raw gamma ray. Here's the dense neutron. Here's the sonic log. Here's the resistivity, and this is the ROP, the rate of penetration. This is how quickly we drilled it in feet per hour. And one of the things that I probably didn't mention on Petrophysics for Dummies, here is a formation dip, Schlumberger Cyber Dip product. And let me just quickly mention what this is. Throughout before the 80s or whatever, we make a resistivity measurement in the wellbore, very, very shallow, at the wellbore, at the sand face, as it were. So we have these electrical measurements, and then we look for correlations in those measurements. And what tends to happen is if you have a bedding plane, a piece of rock, a sand, and then a shale intersecting, and we've drilled a hole through it, what you'll see is that surface there will appear as a sinusoid. If you kind of unwrap the wellbore, it will appear as a sinusoid on a wellbore face, if you like. So we have these images, these unwrapped wellbores, and that will appear as a sinusoid. Now in modern tools, since 1986, we've had a wonderful tool, I guess first started it, called the FMS, the Formation Micro Scanner, and you can see it's got lots of little buttons here, and it drags them along the wellbore face, and it kind of makes a lot of electrical measurements, and then you put them all together and you've got these beautiful images where you can see the actual geology itself. But back in the day, in 1988 terms, and this tool was just a simple four-arm two-scratcher Dipmeter curve, and you basically run a little bit of processing looking for these sinusoids, and the degree of correlation will allow you to predict the formation dip. So to read this, you basically say that the grid across here is going from 10 degrees, so 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 to 90 degrees. So here we say that the formation is just about 10 degrees dip, and the tadpoles, if you like, the little tails, point in the direction of dip. So this is all southerly facing rock at around about 10 degrees dip towards the south. So I just put this on here. Although this looks like it correlates, this log is not this log. There's probably about 30 years separating the two. But nevertheless, that's how the technology starts, and that's how the technology ends up. That's one of the reasons why logging costs $2 or $3 million a time these days. Okay, so going back here, you can see in this particular well, there's very low dips, so there's less than 10 degrees, and most of this stuff is dipping towards the west. And from our seismic, we might be able to confirm that, or whatever, that the structure. So we roughly know what the rocks are from the geology. This would be a shaley package. Remember, Petrophysics for Dummies will explain why that's a shale, and we know roughly what direction they're heading in. So if we take the next, we look down a little bit. Here is an interval in the Paleocene, and you'll see that actually we've tested this well. So we've DST'd it. It's called drill stem testing, and let me just show you what drill stem testing is. You will have all seen pictures back in the day of oil wells gushing out like that. It's fair to say that we do not do it this way anymore, and I'm not sure that was particularly deliberate. But when we drill these wells, we have pressure control equipment on it. So basically here we take our geology, our rock formations, and then we perforate them. Remember, I told you we put metal liner inside the pipe to keep the hole open, and then when we come to test the well, we have to blast it with perforation intervals. Now these guns here, typically we would shoot something at 6 shots per foot, phased at 120 degrees. So you could possibly make out that these guns here, in fact, these explosives, these are what's called shaped charges, are run in this tool, and then they actually fire out at 120 degrees all around the well in every direction. And we shoot holes in the casing and go through into the geology, and then through these holes we have the fluids can flow into the wellbore and then flow up to surface, and we keep them under control with this pressure control equipment, and then we pump it into these tanks here, which are squeezed on at the last minute to the rig. It's the same kit, just you can see a little bit more. We've got some separator tanks in here, so we flow fluids into these tanks, and then the gas floats on the top, and the oil floats in the middle, and the water floats to the bottom, and we siphon it off, and we measure the flow rate for the well, and then we pump it out through a flare boom, and we ignite it, which is not so popular these days because of obviously greenhouse gas emissions and stuff like that. So these days, well testing is becoming a little bit less. We actually have to capture the hydrocarbon and put it in a boat these days, which makes it a lot more expensive. But typically we would flow a well for 8 hours or 12 hours or 16 hours. And then you actually shut the well bore in, and then you learn a lot more how it pressures up again, actually. So you flow the well and the well pressure drops, and then when you finish flowing the well, you shut it in, and then it builds up, and you can actually tell quite a bit about the reservoir from how quickly the pressure builds up. But anyway, that's a subject from another talk. So that's well testing, and you'll see on my CPIs or my raw log displays where we have well tests. And this well here, let me have a look in here. Can I zoom in here? How much did this flow? This flowed 4,467 barrels of oil a day. So that flowed oil and around about 20 million scuffs. It's 20 million standard cubic feet of gas a day from this interval here. So you can see Petrophysics for Dummies again. Remember, good porosity, high resistivity. That's what we look for. You see the resistivity sort of peaking up here. So we go on. They've obviously, oh look, there's another well test. What did that one do? Oh, no flow after acid. Okay, so this well actually is one of the chalk intervals, and that well didn't flow. So dry test, very tight. So that means low permeability. But luckily, there's some other stuff deeper down as our main reservoir target. Again, just mentioning Petrophysics for Dummies again. If we look at the resistivity thing, one of this resistivity patterns that you look for, you take your Petrophysics rocks tool right on, and then if you have a look at the resistivity and the porosity, and you look for patterns, and you'll see that the resistivity follows the porosity, and this is typical for a watery profile. So the resistivity drops as the porosity increases. So that's something you look for with your Petrophysics rocks tool. Go down the well, porosity is scaled to increase from right to left, and resistivity drops in that same way, sort of stuff. So that's a good way of scanning a log first off to see whether you've got anything of interest. And then here you can see where you develop porosity, the resistivity drops, and that's not a good sign if you're looking for hydrocarbons. So if we go down here again, here's another reservoir actually. It's called the Devil's Hole sand member. It's a bit of a strange sand in the Valhall formation, not quite Jurassic, or I'm not sure where it is these days. Actually, they might call it Jurassic these days, but it's but we'll come back to it. Let me have a look here. Let's have a zoom in. What did that one do? That flowed 12 million scuffs a day of gas or condensate. Yes, exactly. So that's 12 million scuffs a day. So and that's a bit of a not a very nice looking reservoir. Let's get on to the main thing, and this is what we look for here. Now this is nice resistivity, a hydrocarbon signal, if you like. It's as we increase resistivity, we increase porosity. That's what you're looking for. They used to call it May Westing, a May West signal in back in the day, and these days it's not politically correct to explain what that is, but you can Google it. And so here we have a hydrocarbon signal at the top where there's an anti-correlation. So your Petrophysics rocks tool will anti-correlate, but then down here you can see, okay, they're following, the resistivity is following the porosity development again. So that's a watery signal. Here, what you can also see, these little points here, these symbols here represent core data, because one of the things that we do when we log a well or when we drill a well is we often cut core. So we go into the well and we see a bit of gas and think, all right, okay, let's get some rock samples. Push that slide to show you what it is. Here is Petrophysics for Dummies course, lithology determination. So we're drilling down, we put a special drill bit on, and it kind of drills down either side, and it leaves this kind of like stump of rock in the middle, the core that is recovered up into the middle of the drill string, and then we bring it out to surface, and it's in 30-foot barrels, 90 foot, which are connected together in 90-foot sections, and we break it down and we bring it down carefully from the drill floor without flexing it or breaking it. It's easy to do. So we put it in a little stand here to hold, support the core barrel, because inside that core barrel you see here is rock that we're recovering, and then we have a geologist here colouring in stuff again. Here is the markings. They've gone with the red and yellow marking. I always thought that red was on the right, but maybe I'm wrong. Anyway, so they show you the right way up for the core. It's important to make sure that you don't mix it up at surface, and then you can go down and look at the core in a little bit more detail. So you ship it back into town, and then we get our core photographs. Now, just for the avoidance of doubt, so this has been drilled, and this is placed in the core trays here. So this bit here goes down here, and then the next bit is here. So we've just put this into core trays here. So this is the top, and this would be the bottom. And this is photographs under white light. And you can see that this is in the laboratory, and we've made some plug measurements here. We've taken some core plugs, and we've made some measurements on that core plugs, and we'll use those later on to calibrate our log analysis. And one of the other things we do is we can photograph things under white light and UV light. So here's UV light, and one of the things that you'll notice under ultraviolet light is that hydrocarbons often fluoresce under UV light. So here this remains pretty dark, so there's not a lot of hydrocarbons in here, say, and then you've got some nice mild bluish fluorescence here. So this would be good rock. This doesn't look too great in terms of or it could be very good and is very flushed by the mud filtrate sort of stuff. So you'll see that on the edges this core. This is where the mud filtrate sort of starts to seep in and invade and displace some of the reservoir hydrocarbons. This looks quite good rock here as well. So if I toggle between the two, this is exactly the same rock under white light and UV light. And then to add complication, we make some measurements on these core plugs, and you can see that kind of makes sense actually. What I talked about here is this dark rock doesn't have much hydrocarbon in it. This is 23% porosity. That means that 23% of the rock is holes, 19% is holes, 18% is holes. But the permeability, which is the degree to which you can flow things through, is quite low here, 3.5 millidarcies, 1.5 millidarcies. It's not very good permeability here. Whereas here, we've got 1,000 millidarcies, 1,700 millidarcies, 2,000 millidarcies. So that's actually 2 darcies actually. Here's 325 millidarcies. Typically, North Sea reservoirs are good. North Sea reservoirs are between 200 and 2 darcies kind of stuff. That would be a typically good reservoir range. So this is all kind of good stuff here. Now, one of the interesting things about this particular interval, as we'll see when we go back to look at the logs, it actually we cored across the Triassic Jurassic boundary, and this is what's called an unconformity. There's about 55 million years of difference between the rocks that were laid down here and the Jurassic here. Now I challenge you to put where the unconformity occurs. I'll just highlight it for you here. Here is where the actual boundary between the Jurassic and the Triassic is. So this is all old rocks, and then this is rocks. These are 55 million years younger. So there's quite a bit of time difference between these two, and you'll notice this sort of these intervals up here. And if I look at the UV photographs here, you see you've got this. You've got this fluorescence here. So this is hydrocarbon bearing. There's not much hydrocarbon bearing in this stuff, and then there's bits of hydrocarbon in this Triassic rock as well. So if I toggle it backwards and forwards, you'll see that there's some oil in here and in here, but not much in here. And part of the reason why I probably overdid this slide a little bit. I started out, I was just going to label a couple of them, and then I got carried away. But let me just highlight this interval here. I've put it in pale blue. This is kind of cemented rock. Remember, this is at the very top of the Triassic, so it's reasonable porosity, 20% porosity, but you'll see that the permeability, where they can measure it, they can't measure permeability everywhere, is pretty low. 0.3 of a millidarcy, 2 millidarcies, 0.7 millidarcies. So this is low permeability rock, and you could imagine that at the end of the Triassic, which are reasonably good porosities and permeabilities, a couple of 100 millidarcies here and there, and then here's an example of 35 millidarcies, and then the vertical permeabilities are generally a little bit lower. Going through the rock is generally less permeable than going across the rock, and here's one to disprove that, just to make the point that actually it's not always the case. That's 140 millidarcies, and yet the vertical plug is 256. But in general, and then here's one in the, actually here's another example in the Jurassic that it's 3,760, 3.7 darcies, and here's 4.3 darcies. This rock is pretty good permeability. Here's a 7 darcy rock. So this is what's called the Fulmar Formation, which just sits on top of the Jurassic. So it's come in really clean sand after 55 million years of sitting around waiting for the Jurassic to come in, and generally it's a good reservoir as well. But as we saw in the previous slide, there are good reservoirs in the Triassic as well here. So this is pretty good stuff as well. Darcy rock. Okie dokie. So let's get out of the Jurassic boundary. Sorry about that. Okay, so that's the stuff that we learned from core, and that was the resistivity trend that got us all excited. But here again, we're checking as we go down. Okay, look, that's more watery trends. You know, water, everything's tracking each other. They follow each other. That's not good. And then we get down to another bit of Triassic sand, more sand again. But again, it's not looking good from a hydrocarbon point of view. So for that reason, probably the guys on the rig said, right, let's call it quits there. We're not, let's just check this last little bit here. No, that's all, that all looks pretty watery here. Maybe something going on down here, but anyway, we've got a big reservoir discovery above us. Let's call it quits on the TD. So let's make some wireline log measurements. So I put this information on the bottom of my raw log displays. Remember, in Petrophysics for Dummies, we talked about these pressure measurements we made and how we measure fluids, the pressures in the wellbore, and we can join the lines up to give us different pressure regimes and determine what the fluid is in those reservoirs. So one of the things we can also do is as we make these pressure measurements, we also from about 1985 onwards, we made mobility measurements. So we basically sort of say how good quality, what's the sort of permeability of the pressure measurements. So here we see that in the Jurassic here, this is mobility per centipoise. It's a permeability per fluid type sort of stuff, because we're measuring with mud. We don't know exactly what the fluid mix is downhole, so we make this mobility. It's a kind of like a normalized permeability measurement, and you can see that the reservoirs here are around about 10 to 20 millidarcy centipoise here in the Triassic, and up here in the Paleocene they're a little bit tighter. And if we look at the pressure evaluation in the Paleocene, we can put an oil gradient through here, an oil gradient of an oily gradient, 0.13 psi. It's quite a light gradient, that actually. That's a very light gradient. You see it. There's a bit of scatter in this pressure data. It's quite low permeability, which probably is why one of the reasons we get quite a light oil gradient, or difficulty fitting a decent gradient through it. But that's a gradient we would put through, and then we would compare it to other wells in the area and work out where our true free water level is. It's a little bit more convincing down here in the Triassic and the Jurassic. Here's the permeabilities. We've got the mobilities. We've got hundreds of millidarcies up here, tens of millidarcy centipoise here, and we see that we form a nice clear 0.2 psi condensate gradient. So typically gas is 0.1 psi per foot, water is 0.4 psi per foot, and oil is 0.3 psi per foot. So this condensate gradient, 0.2 psi per foot, is kind of what we expect here. And then we see the water pressures in those, remember, where the resistivity tracked the porosity. In fact, one of the interesting things, we've got a couple of water gradients here. We've got one here and one there, which kind of indicates that this aquifer is not in pressure communication. There's a slight barrier between the two reservoirs. Okay, so that's the pressure measurements we make. I'm going to probably cover the core analysis stuff when we get onto the CPI evaluation. I'll come back to this in a little bit more detail, but here is some other log measurements that we make. This is the density neutron cross plot, and this is a spectral gamma ray measurement, which I'll talk about here a little bit more. Here's a density neutron cross plot. Again, we did discuss this a little bit in Petrophysics for Dummies. In essence, it's kind of, you have like a kind of a ternary diagram here. Here at this end of the triangle is the matrix. This is no porosity at all. Here is what's called shale point. There are some subtleties between dry shales and wet shales or whatever, but for the purposes of this, maybe we'll put that in the master's course later on. This is 100% shale, and then up here underneath me or behind me is the fluid. So we've got 100% fluid up where I am, and so we take these two measurements, the neutron and the density, and wherever you cross plot, that can tell you what porosity you are. So however far along this axis you are gives you porosity, and however close to this, if you're here, you're at 100% shale, and if you're here at this line here, you're at 100% sand at 15% porosity. So this stuff here that's less than 0% sand, that is a gas effect, because density and neutron read too low in gas. This ternary diagram breaks down, which we'll discuss a little bit further on. Okay, and the next thing I said was that this is a spectral gamma ray. So this is a particular type of gamma ray. We did mention it in the Petrophysics for Dummies course, but when we take gamma ray measurements, we have a look at the energy associated with that particular gamma ray reading, and from that we can tell whether it's gamma rays that are emitted by thorium, potassium. I've left off uranium here, but that's because this cross plot is just a thorium and potassium percentage here, and there are some very areas of this chart which are said to be micaceous rocks. So this is micas, and this is illites in here, and montmorillonites and chlorites down here. Now I have spoken to some more geological types than me, and they don't, and some people are quite skeptical about this kind of this kind of ratio work. But this is what the charts say. If you go and look at the chart books, kaolinites would plot up here. So this is a clay typing kind of a tool. It kind of fell out of favor a little bit with LWD data, because LWD data you tend not to get spectral gamma ray data from LWD tools, because there's a lot of steel around in LWD tools, and that tends to shield out some of the thoriums, I think it is, and so you get a bit of a spectral biasing. But back in the day when we were wirelining tools, we had very big crystals, so we get good counting statistics, and we could get a little bit more reliable spectral gamma ray data. I think the modern LWD tools these days are coming a bit more back into fashion, but in an ideal world, it'll help you with your clay typing. Okay, so that's an introduction to the raw logs of this well. What we're going to discuss next is how we're going to run through the interpretation. Okay. Okay, see what I mean? I did go on a little bit there in trying to introduce you to the North Sea region and the wells that we drilled there. But please stick around for part 2 of this presentation. Hopefully you'll appreciate it. Now we're going to go and delve into a little bit of analysis, look at a zone in a little bit more detail, and we're going to build up the analysis and the sorts of things that we translate, learning the lessons from the Petrophysics for Dummies series, and showing you how the interpretation is built up and what this well eventually looks like and how it's evaluated. Cheers then, thanks a lot.